Before we begin, this story involves the death of a person under disputed circumstances and the financial ruin of thousands of ordinary people who lost their retirement savings. If either of those is something you need to step away from, we understand. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. March 19, 1997. A Bell 212 helicopter lifts off from a jungle helipad deep in the Borneo rainforest, headed south. Michael de Guzman is on board. He's flying to meet executives from Freeport McMoran, the company that has spent the past several weeks drilling its own holes into the most celebrated gold deposit on Earth. 45 minutes later, the helicopter lands at the Samarinda airstrip. The Freeport executives are waiting. De Guzman is not on the helicopter. No one saw him leave. His briefcase is still on board. The door is open. You're listening to the Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, the $6 billion gold mine that every independent lab in the industry certified, and how it never existed. The Busang site sits in a remote canyon in East Kalimantan, the Indonesian half of the island of Borneo. You can't drive there. Access is by helicopter or a multi-day river journey. Equatorial heat above 90 degrees year-round, the air close and heavy. At the center of the site stood a long, open-sided structure on wooden stilts. The sample shed, shelves lined with core boxes, wooden trays holding split cylinders of rock pulled from hundreds of meters underground, each labeled by depth and sample number. Running the operation, Michael de Guzman, chief geologist, white lab coat, orange hard hat. He met every investor delegation himself, with hand-drawn geological maps and tables of assay results. He answered every technical question like a man who had personally overseen every drill hole at the site. The investors believed him. So did the labs. The story starts in 1993 in the office of a failed Calgary oil broker named David Walsh. Walsh had run through his savings on ventures that went nowhere. He was deep in personal debt, operating a company called Bre-X Minerals from a basement in Calgary. Bre-X had no producing mines, almost no cash. What it had was a geological hunch. Walsh and de Guzman, who had spent years working the Indonesian mining circuit, staked a claim in the Busang River area of East Kalimantan. Nobody paid attention. Indonesia was full of explorers chasing mineral claims that came to nothing. Then the drill results came back. The first assay reports from Busang showed gold. Not trace amounts, substantial numbers. An assay is just the lab test that measures how much gold sits inside a sample of rock. And de Guzman's samples were testing rich, then richer still. Each new batch of cores beat the last. Independent laboratories in Jakarta tested the samples. They confirmed the numbers. Word spread. By 1996, Bre-X had joined the Toronto Stock Exchange's major index. Its market capitalization, the total value of all its outstanding shares, reached $6 billion Canadian dollars. Mutual funds bought in. Pension funds bought in. Individual Canadians who'd never heard of Kalimantan looked at the numbers and bought in. It was, by every authoritative assessment, the largest undeveloped gold deposit in history. And it had been verified. Multiple independent labs. Real samples, pulled from the ground and split open and tested by accredited professionals. The numbers weren't based on projections or rumor, they were based on physical rock cores. Gold mining is a business built on faith, faith that the rock far below matches what comes up the drill pipe. The whole system runs on trust in the sample. There was one thing nobody had done yet. Nobody had drilled their own holes. In the 1990s, Canadian junior mining stocks had a reputation. Bay Street sometimes called them venture capital for people who like to dig holes. Occasional frauds, occasional fortunes. But Busang was different. Busang had independent assays. It was in the index. Even people who should have known better looked at those lab reports and concluded, this time it's real. Micro cliffhanger 1. Every laboratory that touched those samples said the same thing. This was real, certified. The largest gold find in history. The only question nobody had asked yet was what would happen when someone finally drilled their own holes. That question arrived from an unlikely direction. By late 1996, the Indonesian government under President Suharto wanted its share. Bre-X was pressured to bring in Freeport McMoran, a large American mining company with existing Indonesian operations, and to share the project with interests connected to Suharto's own family. If Bre-X wanted to keep the license, those were the terms. Walsh's team was furious. It looked like extortion. It probably was. But the extortion had an unintended consequence. Before Freeport would commit capital to developing the site, it sent its own geologists to Bu Sahang to drill its own holes, right beside the ones de Guzman's team had drilled. Standard industry practice: you don't commit to developing a major deposit without verifying the reserve numbers yourself. What looked like a political shakedown was about to become the first truly independent test of the richest mine on Earth. In February 1997, Freeport's drills bit into the ground at Bu Sahang. The results came back almost immediately. The rock at Bu Sahang, hundreds of meters underground, exactly where de Guzman's years of assay results said the gold should be, contained virtually no recoverable gold. Freeport ran the tests again. Same result. They flew additional cores to separate labs. Same result. The numbers weren't slightly off. They were orders of magnitude lower. On March 26, 1997, Freeport McMoran issued a public statement. Their independent assays had found essentially no gold at Bu Sahang. That morning, Bre-X shares had been trading near $15 Canadian. Within an hour of the announcement, trading was halted. Sell orders stacked up against empty air. Pension fund managers stared at terminals. Individual investors called their brokers and couldn't get through. The people who bought Bre-X had done what investors are supposed to do. They'd read the independent lab reports. They'd noted the index listing. Institutional buyers had run their own due diligence reviews. Every process had worked exactly as designed. The samples had not. Micro cliffhanger too. Freeport's geologists knew the gold wasn't there. What nobody could yet explain was how 4 years of independent lab testing had confirmed numbers that simply didn't exist. The answer was in the samples themselves, and it would take a forensic audit to find it. But before we get to that audit, there was the man who disappeared from the helicopter. On March 19th, a full week before Freeport's public announcement, de Guzman had boarded that Bell 212 and never arrived at the other end. His body was recovered from the jungle floor 4 days later. Indonesian authorities ruled it a suicide. 3 competing explanations have circulated since then, and none has been definitively settled. The official ruling: suicide. De Guzman reportedly knew that Freeport's independent drilling was turning up no gold. A handwritten letter found in his Samarinda hotel room appeared to reference that fact directly. He'd reportedly told colleagues he was suffering from hepatitis B. He may have decided he couldn't face what was coming. The second theory: murder. He held information that implicated others. His body had been in the equatorial heat for 4 days when it was recovered. Badly decomposed, cause of death medically unverifiable. His Indonesian wife and some local investigators disputed the identification. If there were people who needed him silent before he could cooperate with investigators, they had a very narrow window. The third, fringe, but documented in the Indonesian press at the time, faked death. The body was unrecognizable. His deputy on the ground at Bu Sahang, Cesar Puspos, the geologist most likely to have physically carried out the salting, vanished at the same moment and has never been found. Subsequent DNA testing was reported as consistent with de Guzman's identity, though portions of his family continued to dispute it. The Indonesian investigation was officially closed. No one was ever charged in connection with de Guzman's death. In May 1997, the forensic auditors from Strathcona Mineral Services issued their report. 36 pages. It described in precise detail exactly how the Bu Sahang core samples had been altered. The method: alluvial gold, fine rounded flakes purchased from local river miners working the Kali Mantan riverbeds, had been ground fine and mixed into the core samples before they were sealed and shipped to the independent laboratories. The physical signature gave it away. Gold that forms inside hard rock deep underground is angular and crystalline. Alluvial gold, river gold, is rounded and water-worn, smoothed by centuries of movement. Under a geologist's loupe, the two types look different. Every independent lab that had certified Bu Sahang's reserves had been testing alluvial gold stirred into the samples before sealing. They hadn't been testing the rock. They'd been testing the fraud. Think about the patience that took. This wasn't one forged document. It was a deception fed by hand into sample after sample, batch after batch, over years, steady enough that no lab ever caught it. The Strathcona report was unambiguous. The Bu Sahang gold deposit, as represented, did not exist. Not at the scale reported, not at any economically meaningful scale. The largest undeveloped gold discovery in history, certified by labs, endorsed by index committees, bought by pension funds, had been assembled in a sample shed in the jungle with gold dust bought from local miners. By May 4th, Bre-X shares had collapsed from $15 to effectively zero. The Toronto Stock Exchange suspended trading permanently. Investor losses were estimated at $6 billion. Ontario teachers' pension funds, union retirement accounts, individual Canadians who had bet their savings on a mine they'd never see. Here's the detail that reframes the helicopter. Weeks before de Guzman boarded that Bell 212, he had already received private word that Freeport's independent drilling was turning up no gold. A handwritten note found in his Samarinda hotel room appears to acknowledge it directly. So when he climbed into that helicopter, he wasn't flying toward uncertainty. He was flying to meet the very men who were about to expose him, knowing the richest gold mine on Earth was about to be revealed as dust. Whether he stepped out that door himself or someone made sure he never landed, he carried the answer with him into the jungle. And no one ever got it back. In the end, nobody went to prison. David Walsh died of a cerebral aneurysm in Nassau, Bahamas in May 1997. The same month the fraud was confirmed. De Guzman was already gone. John Felder Hoff, the VP who had sold 84 million Canadian dollars in Bre-X shares before the collapse, faced insider trading proceedings for 8 years. In 2007, he was acquitted on all counts. Cesar Puspos, de Guzman's deputy and the most likely person to have physically carried out the salting, vanished when the fraud broke and has never been found. What Bre-X demonstrated is something specific. A fraud can succeed completely when it's constructed at the one point in the chain where independent verification was supposed to be impossible to fake. Every institutional safeguard downstream of those samples worked exactly as designed. The labs were legitimate, the process was legitimate, the samples were not. The people who lost their retirement savings on Bre-X had done exactly what they were supposed to do. The system failed them at the source. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark. D'atravage, pronunciation. Candidates from brief for segment QA. Text, Bre-X, Bre-X, company, risk and normal. 2 syllables, X spoken as a letter, de Guzman, person, risk equals high, expected equals de Guzman, Bu Sahang, place, risk equals normal, Kahlimahan Tahan river site, stress second syllable, Kahlimahan Tan, place, risk equals high, expected equals Kahlimahan Tahan, Kal Iman Tan, Felder Hoff person, risk equals normal, Dutch origin, TTS may clip final syllable, Freeport Mi'kmaq Ran, company, risk equals normal, hyphenated, stress final syllable of Mi'kmaq Ran,